going over monitoring and news gathering on the social web as part of your work reporting on the coronavirus. So firstly, I'm Lydia Morrish. I'm First Draft's digital content producer. I report on elections, misinformation, and at the moment coronavirus, and create a lot of multimedia content around First Draft's work.
Hi everyone, my name is Sebastian Cubbon. I'm a research analyst at First Draft, and I hope that some of the methods and tools which we're going to show you today can make your life a little bit easier during these challenging times.
Thanks, Seb. So just a bit of housekeeping. To participate, if you want to ask any questions, please write down your questions in the chat and we will visit them at the end of each section. There's going to be 2 sections, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end as well. We also have our ethics and standards editor, Victoria Kwan, on the call, and our digital editor, Alastair Reid, and they'll be available for questions as well. So to begin, this is just a quick run through of the agenda. So we're going to start with the fundamentals of online news gathering, which I'm going to walk you through. And then we're going to move on to how to apply those techniques to specific platforms to monitor. And Seb will be doing that bit, and then we'll go to the Q&A. But yeah, we'll have some questions in between those 2 sections as well. So just a little bit about First Draft, for those of you who don't know us very well. We're a global nonprofit that tackles disinformation and media manipulation through projects such as collaborative platforms supporting and connecting journalists. We do research into misinformation and how to combat it. And we also do training like our flagship simulations and webinars in challenging times like this. So a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about is in our online coronavirus at firstdraftnews.org/coronavirus. We've got all kinds of resources there as part of this global event and the infodemic around it. There's news gathering and verification tools, data and information sources, a searchable reading list, and even a database of debunks. So on with the fundamentals of online news gathering. Regardless of your beat, understanding how to use the social web to discover, monitor, and research stories is really an essential skill. We'll be going more into how to find information on specific platforms later, but first let's look at the fundamentals of online news gathering. This is really all about what we're looking for. So, online news gathering is a process with 2 main parts: sources and keywords. Depending on your beat or your topic of interest, the sources and keywords will be different. Maybe you're looking for stories on people self-isolating at the moment. Maybe you're looking for new rumours that are circulating around treatments or government measures. Perhaps you want to see what new information you can find out from health officials online. So no matter what you're looking for, these apply to any story. First, sources. These are the people that you go to for stories, of course: community leaders, academics, influencers, and so on. For example, if you wanted to report on how the health service is coping at the moment, you might want to find doctors or nurses talking about it, or people who work for health authorities. The keywords, this is really like what you're looking for. What are people saying? What are the key terms, phrases, or hashtags used around the coronavirus crisis or the area that you're looking into? So we might use terms like ward, patients, or beds to find people talking about hospitals firsthand. The crucial thing to remember is sources and keywords feed into each other. So finding sources will lead you to keywords, and keywords will lead you to new sources. Next slide. Language and keywords. It's really important when thinking about sources and keywords to think about how people really talk online. So how do people, what kind of phrases do people use when they're typing into social networks or sending messages? This will be different for different communities. some people might be using slang, swear words, acronyms. Really think about the communities you want to tap into and the language that they use. So maybe if it's more authoritative sources that you're looking for, they're probably going to be using more formal and spelled correctly words. It's important to also consider that people might not speak in the way that you speak. So yeah, really try to tap into how other people might be talking. And it's always useful to create a spreadsheet of keywords and sources. At First Draft, we love a spreadsheet when we're monitoring elections or right now the coronavirus. So yeah, start a document or a spreadsheet to keep track of the different narratives and keywords around the searches that you want to perform. And as the coronavirus might continue for months, this will also save you time in the future if you want to come back or revisit any of these searches. Moving on. As I was saying about spellings, we don't all get things right every time we write something online, including the US president. So when you're searching online, it's also important to include misspellings of words that you're looking for. And seeing as coronavirus really wasn't a household name before this crisis, people are getting it wrong. If we could move on to the next slide. Here's a few examples of the different ways people are spelling coronavirus online. These are some popular hashtags that have been out in the last few months. As you can see, yeah, just like slight variations of how coronavirus is spelt. So you can try searching for those, or use an asterisk after colon, or COVID, and that will give you all of the different derivatives of that word. So it kind of fills in the blanks. On to the next slide. You can apply keywords to platforms using boolean searches. These are a really great way of really narrowing down what you want to find and what you want to search. So you can combine search terms, you can exclude search terms, or you can add in varieties. So and returns results with all specified terms. As you can see from the top search string, if you search coronavirus and self-isolating and I'm, you'll get your results will include all of those terms. You can use or, which returns results with any of the specified terms. So as you can see from the second one, you can search for coronavirus or COVID, so people using either of those terms. Not will exclude specified terms, so if you want to get results from authoritative sources who aren't accidentally writing COVID-18, then you can try saying not COVID-18. You can also return phrases in quote marks, so you can't search for two words at the same time. So if a phrase like self-isolating without using the quote marks, it might break your string if you do that. And brackets are a really great way of, for more complex search strings, you can group together the different sections. It's also great to include first-person terms in your searches if you want to find first-hand sources. So like the top one, I'm with self-isolating and coronavirus. Really think about the language people use when they're talking about their own experiences. So we, for example, or my family. On to the next. This is an example of the First Drafts team's like base coronavirus search string. These are examples of all the different iterations of how coronavirus is said in different online communities. We don't endorse all of these phrases, but a lot of communities are using these phrases, so it's a really great way of tapping into specific communities and yeah, really thinking about how they're talking. Moving on. When it comes to finding sources, Twitter lists are a great way of organizing authoritative accounts on particular subjects or locations. You can search for other people's lists to find new sources quickly on Google with the search string just along the top. The asterisk again fills in any blanks, and then you can put your specific search term in after that. For example, coronavirus or epidemiologists, or yeah, really anything, doctors, and you could maybe put a location in there as well to see if anything comes up. And with this really great list copy tool at the URL just under where it says copy Twitter lists, you can see what other lists are out there by searching an account's handle, and then you can copy it over to your account. So basically stealing, but for positive things. So for example, you might want to input an academic's handle and see if they have any lists on fellow academics. You can try searching for lists titled COVID coronavirus or epidemiologists, and investigative journalist Gavin Sheridan already has a really great list of experts for the coronavirus. His handle is just there on the screen, and he has, the list is called COVID-19. You can also organize sources on Facebook, like pages and groups, into lists on Crowdtangle, which my colleague Seb will talk about in a bit. Follow a Wonk is a really great way to find experts to talk to as well. It's a free online tool, although it does have a paid section with more advanced functions. If you want to find experts on pandemics, for example, you can just input that into the search and it will give you all the results of people who have pandemic in their bio. And you can arrange them by number of tweets, account creation date, and follow account, things like that, to increase the chances of having a more authoritative source. Moving on to the next slide. LinkedIn's people search is also a really great way to find either experts or people who work in specific organizations, like maybe the World Health Organization. You can search, for example, for infectious diseases, and you'll see all the people who have infectious diseases on their profile. LinkedIn also has a really good content search. I don't know if you've ever used it before, but you can see who's talking about a specific topic. So from the homepage, you could try searching work from home to see who's talking about that and maybe how it's affecting their business currently. They also have filters to narrow down your searches by location or industry or language. That can be a really great way of finding sources. Next slide. So this is TweetDeck. This is a really great tool for putting your searches in. So compiling all your keywords and searching for them at the same time, and you'll get like a rolling list of all the instances that people are using them. And you can also change keywords and add in new search strings in different columns to find new sources. Next slide. For those of you with access to Crowdtangle, you can find sources by searching pages or groups with these boolean searches, although it's slightly different on Facebook. They don't support the typical boolean operators like and, not, or. You separate the words with commas, and then next slide, they have more search options, so you can exclude search terms or tailor your search that way. And moving on, Crowdtangle also just released a really cool new search tool earlier this week. They weren't going to deploy it yet, but in light of coronavirus, they let us all have it early. You can search for rumors or different narratives. You can see trends on there very well. As you can see from the example here, the mentions of coronavirus army trucks has increased over the last 24 hours. So yesterday it had gone from no mentions to 61.1 thousand interactions. It's probably way more now, but that's just an example. And on to the next. Crowdtangle also has this really great free link checker that anyone can use. You can add it to your browser, and when you're on any article or page, it will check the link to see where it's been shared online. That's a really great way of finding new sources from articles. It'll show you what Facebook pages or groups, etc. have shared it. So we'll see an example on the next slide. This is a news piece from The Independent about a US Army lab being shut down over fears viruses could escape. And it's from August 2019, and it is accurate. But like some instances of misinformation, it's accurate content. accurate content but being shared out of context. And so this old article is being shared now quite a lot on Facebook over the last week. You can see from the Crowdtangle link checker, which is scrolling on the screen, that is being shared in a lot of groups and by a lot of pages on Facebook in the last few days. And on to the next slide. Just to circle back to the fundamentals, sources and keywords, they really do feed into each other and they're both as important as each other to remember. So we call this the feedback loop. It's all about knowing what sources to look at that will lead to keywords, and those keywords will lead to new sources. So I'm going to turn over to Seb in just a second to talk about monitoring platforms. Would any of you like to have any of your questions answered just yet? Just going to look at the chat.
Hi, yeah. So Alastair has been doing a great job of answering some of the questions that we've gotten in the chat. If anybody else has any questions right now or anything you'd like to add around about your own organizations and practices around news gathering, we would love to hear from you.
And just while that's happening, I was going to answer one of the questions in there. This is Alastair Reid, by the way. I was going to address the question about recording in a spreadsheet. Now, what we've done at First Draft quite a lot is to, especially when it's something in different languages, is to think about it in topics. Just as Lydia was saying, what specific topics or what areas of interest or what stories do we want to search around? I'm not sure if this will work, but if I share my screen very briefly, I can show you an example of exactly that. And if I just find where that might be, where is that spreadsheet? Here we go. So this is something which we used in the EU election, which we were covering last year, where we used the spreadsheets to identify different topics of interest where we might find misinformation or disinformation circulating. So around electoral fraud, about extreme politics, migration, gender and identity. And for each of these, we thought through what kind of words, what kind of language might people be tweeting about or including in Facebook posts. And then what does that look like in all the different languages as well. So this is the way that we organized it there. We're in the process of doing it for the coronavirus stories and for disinformation as well. But it really depends on the context and on what you're trying to achieve. I did a similar thing when I was working at the Press Association, the UK National News Agency, and we did it for just covering the World Cup, the 2018 World Cup. We did exactly the same thing, thinking about the hashtags and the phrases and everything else which different teams use to try and spur their team on, to see what kind of reports we might be seeing in different languages and around different games. So it depends on the story, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, but this is the one way that we've approached it before.
Great, thank you so much for that, Alastair. So we have another question here asking if we have any experiences with Talkwalker. Is that something that you've used before, or if there is anybody in the session right now who has used Talkwalker before and would like to share their experience with that, it would be great.
So my knowledge of Talkwalker is that it's very powerful, but that it's quite expensive. So as such, I've never actually had a chance to use it. But if other people have experience in that, then that's something I'd be interested in hearing about. But a lot of the stuff that we try to share and communicate around First Draft is often free tools and things that anyone can apply.
It's also worth just mentioning as an add to the question about spreadsheets. Sometimes it is a bit of trial and error. You might have included a term that actually returns something like completely unrelated to what you're looking for. So yeah, you could have like 100 search terms and narrow it down to 10, but one still might be returning things you don't necessarily want to see. So yeah, bit of trial and error.
100%.
So if we move on to the monitoring platforms section of the webinar, and we'll have some more questions after this as well. Over to Seb.
Thank you so much, Lydia. So now I'm just going to run you through a number of quick tools and techniques to use in order to make your monitoring more effective and to help you find relevant, interesting information faster. So let's start off with TweetDeck. It's a great free tool, which Lydia alluded to earlier. So once you've set up your columns from your lists and your keyword searches, you'll notice resulting posts from these are set to most recent. So this means that for popular topics, and the coronavirus obviously is the most popular of all currently, the results will be extremely numerous and will come in very fast, which will likely make it unmanageable to monitor, particularly if you're monitoring several columns simultaneously. So an easy way you can slow the rate of new results appearing, but also find more relevant results, is by using the drop-down icon at the top right of the column. So once you've selected it, you'll be able to filter results by engagement to only obtain content that's gained a certain meaningful level of interaction. So let's move on to Crowdtangle now, which is, as Lydia referred to, another monitoring platform, but that covers this time Facebook, Instagram, and Reddit, and has similar but more advanced filtering options. So those can be found at the top of the post feed on the dashboard. So the platform offers a number of different filters actually that can make your monitoring more efficient depending on your needs and your situation. So for example, if you're following results from a narrow search set up with very specific keyword combinations or a small list of source, and therefore you're not too worried about volume, you can set it to most recent to receive the results in real time. But if you're just starting your day and you're logging in and you just want to get quickly up to speed with what's been trending on social media over the last few hours when you've been away, you can just set it to total interactions over the last 6 hours, for example, to then see which are the pieces of content that have generated the most interaction, the most engagement whilst you're away. If you're looking for individual pieces of content, so individual examples relating to a story or a topic of your choice, you can set the filter to receive only posts that are overperforming. Another technique that can really streamline your search is prioritizing results that receive a given type of reaction through the weights function that I've highlighted in this slide. So for example, if you want to identify content that's been the most widely shared, you could prioritize posts that receive more shares than any other reactions. If you are interested in uncovering coronavirus misinformation, for example, you could set the weights to anger or shock, as very often misinformation relies on provoking strong emotions to gain traction and to have impact on social media. So prioritizing anger and shock reactions here when gathering results from a list of suspicious coronavirus sources or coronavirus related keyword searches could really help you uncover any new rumors or any new pieces of misinformation relating to the coronavirus that are circulating online. So Crowdtangle also has a feature called the live display, which is available just next to the dashboard drop-down menu. It's quite similar to TweetDeck, but it's significantly more powerful as it can enable us to track columns of results from different platforms at the same time and also apply those more advanced filters that we mentioned. So you can apply these filters using the settings wheel that I've highlighted here in the slide. And I've taken this screenshot example from the displays that Crowdtangle themselves have actually provided recently as part of their new coronavirus resources. So if you've got the ability to, I would really highly recommend you checking those out. They feature many ready-made searches that use relevant sources and keyword search strings, and as I said, cover multiple social media platforms. Now, naturally, most of us are unable to actively monitor the social web continuously. We can't always be glued to these platforms. So that's when notifications and alerts really come in handy. So in Crowdtangle, there are different types of alerts, but for example, to be notified about new individual pieces of content related to a given topic that are really gaining significant traction, you can set a viral alert. So these are based on the level of performance, that is how much the content is performing better compared to the other content from that same source. And so then by doing so, you'll be notified of this type of content straight away to your email. Similarly, through Google Alerts, you can enter a boolean search query and enter your email address and receive email notifications whenever a relevant news article or blog post has just been published. There are many free but really powerful monitoring tools that are constantly being created and are also maintained by the open source community that can help you track the major social media platforms. So for example, PicPansy, which I've just seen has actually just recently changed name to PicBubbon, can help you find the most viral hashtags in relation to a key term and then monitor those hashtags. So for example here, even just by entering the general search term coronavirus, we can see that it's identified a sample of related hashtags that are being used widely, and then you can actually click on those hashtags and then follow those and follow the most recent posts that mention those as it comes. As you can see, the tool can also help us identify important or even suspicious sources of information by showing up the related accounts. The tool also enables you to build lists of these accounts in order to monitor those lists, and actually all you need to access that feature is a simple Instagram account. Track Reddit is a great tool. It's similar, but as the name indicates, it works for Reddit. You can create a search by entering a keyword, and the tool will then show on which post the term has been used, and then through the link offered to the post, you can identify relevant communities around a topic of your choice. The Snap Map is a great tool to monitor Snapchat stories. This one actually works through searching for a specific location of where a story was taken, and could be particularly useful with regards to the coronavirus outbreak, to kind of quickly get an overview and gauge how different individuals or different organizations in different countries are feeling and responding to the outbreak, and also to potentially different government measures in response to the outbreak, depending on where they are. Finally, we'd just like to offer the link to First Draft's free online toolkit. It's a toolkit where you can find a number of free, easy to use tools that can assist you even further in your news gathering and monitoring operations. So whether you want to get the most out of Twitter, whether you want to verify a suspicious piece of media content or find relevant communities or individuals, this toolkit, as well as the advanced toolkits that it links to, can really enhance your online news gathering and investigations. So thanks everyone for listening. We really hope that this information has been of value to you. We just love now to open up to any questions that you may have.
Great, thank you so much for that, Seb. So we have a couple of Crowdtangle specific questions for you. So the first question comes from Mohammed, which is, how do I create an account on Crowdtangle?
Okay, so Crowdtangle actually is those you need to contact Facebook for access. We can follow up with you and send a link to their webpage, the Crowdtangle's webpage, where they give more information around that. But essentially, you have to request access to the platform.
Now, as well, that it is free for journalists, so it's not. It has great value, as Seb has been talking through as well.
Right. Yeah, thank you for that. And so the second question on Crowdtangle, for notifications, how do we select a specific topic that we would like to get updates on?
So the way to do that is to first enter a keyword or a list of keywords in a search on Crowdtangle, and then save that search. And then from that, you can actually get an alert based on new results from that search. So you link an alert to a search, essentially. You can also link an alert to a list. So for example, if you've built a list of Facebook pages that you want to follow or Facebook groups, and then you want to be notified if one of their posts is overperforming by a certain amount, you can actually just link the alert to that list.
Great, thank you. And so moving on to Facebook, we had a question earlier. Any tips for monitoring Facebook after the privacy changes they had due to Cambridge Analytica?
So as mentioned, Crowdtangle is a fantastic tool. Of course, you do have to request access, but as Alastair did mention, it is free for journalists, and Crowdtangle does cover Facebook. Crowdtangle is actually now owned by Facebook, so it does have the most extensive coverage of the platform. I believe that somewhere over 36% of all pages that have over 10,000 followers are actually in the Crowdtangle database, and obviously that percentage goes up as the number of followers for the pages goes up. But otherwise, there are filters that you can use in the advanced search in Facebook to narrow down, but it is true that since also the graph search is not there anymore, it has become more difficult to monitor Facebook manually.
Yeah, it's something which, as Seb mentioned just there, like when graph search was taken away, which was how a lot of the different pages and the different information which people can add to their profiles was all kind of registered, and the way that overlapped and intersected. You could look at a profile and you could see what pages they like, or you could see what photos they've been tagged in, and that was all taken away last summer after the privacy issues. There are a lot, you know, there's a community around all this stuff, I think is an important thing to say, in that every platform has got its little hacks and tweaks, and there are people who regularly discuss ways of doing that. Facebook is constantly changing. They've gotten onto this. They've heard about you know, all the folks at Bellingcat and then First Drafts, and how we're always trying to look how to better search these platforms, and they change it on a regular basis, and that's making things really difficult. But the best thing that I think we can all recommend is to try and find some of those communities, the OSINT community, and follow along, because lots of people who are working in this space do work in a kind of open source way and like to share what they're finding. But these kind of tools often will kind of appear and disappear based on what people are building and what changes may be made to different platforms and their API. So it's something that you really need to stay on top of to make sure you've got the latest tools.
Okay, great. So the next question we have here from Zorro: do you have any good free resources for searching for social profiles linked to a specific email?
That's a good question. So that really depends on when people's emails are available, and it's, in my experience, it's much easier to search by email in the US for just because a lot of that information is more public, and so tools like Spokio is really good for that, but it really depends on the person and the email address that you're investigating. If there are other people in the you know, in the chat who might have answers to this as well, that's something which feel free to jump into.
Yeah, and so we also have a question about Web Hotel. So if from Petra, if a domain is registered with Web Hotel, is there any way that we can find out who owns the website? And I will copy these questions into the wider chat as well, in case, yeah, as Alastair said, in case anyone else has insights they'd like to share as well.
So Web Hotel is new to me, but in terms of, you know, finding out who owns a website, there's a few things that you can do. Part of it is looking at the doing a whois search. This has been limited a lot in Europe. Previously, whenever you set up a website, you have to give your name and you have to give like a contact email and a phone number and sometimes even a physical address. And until GDPR, you used to be able to do a whois search, which would show you all of that information. And there's a great plugin, we love plugins at First Drafts, for the Wayback Machine, which has a whois search on it. This does work in countries outside of Europe still, but it's fairly limited in Europe unless you use a VPN. But the whois search, if a website owner has not applied kind of privacy restrictions on that, then it will show you who registered it. That's one thing. Another way of doing it is potentially to look at a website's source code. And this is a bit of a kind of more roundabout way. If you look at a website source code, you might be able to find things about when it was set up and how it was set up. You might be able to find things like ad tracking codes. So if there are adverts on the site, sometimes there's in the page source code, there's a tracking ID number, which links back to their account. So if it's like Google Ads and someone has a Google Ads account and they're making money off Google Ads, then you can find out the ID number and then see what other websites they might have set up. But in terms of a quick and easy way, Whois used to be the best one. It's still usable outside of GDPR zones. And after that, it gets a bit more complicated.
Great. So just looking in the chat for more questions. So here's one, which I think is really relevant and very key for us right now in this quick changing like news environment. How do you cope with information overkill when monitoring all of these platforms simultaneously? Seb?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's a struggle. I mean, monitoring actively anyway is obviously in large part following many columns from many platforms simultaneously. In terms of sort of day-to-day kind of mental well-being, I think what's really important is to take breaks at a regular interval. That's really helped me. In terms of the information overkill, I think that can really start playing a role when you filter on most recent. Now, obviously, sometimes you're going to have to do that, but ideally, what you want to do is that if you do have to do that, you've made sure that the list of sources that you're following in a most recent way is as small as possible. And similarly with keywords, you want the keyword combinations to be as specific as possible. And that's a really, really great way to reduce the noise and reduce the volume. Otherwise, as I mentioned previously in the presentations, those filters do help. And of course, in terms of the overperforming in total interactions filters, those are really important also for us in understanding the tipping point and when to kind of talk about a piece of content and when to really like dive deeper into it. Because if it doesn't have any significant traction, again, it can be kind of difficult to manage whether or not you want to actually talk about it and amplify it further. So yeah, so filters, really narrowing down the searches, narrowing down the list of sources really helps. And in terms of day-to-day, I think regular intervals are very important.
I think with a lot of this as well, and this is probably something we're all trying to manage at the moment for everybody else who's working from home, given the circumstances. If we're going beyond, trying to filter and pass all of this information and monitor all of these sources, I think just setting time aside to do specific things. So it's like, right, during this period, I'm going to go on TweetDeck. I'm going to see in my columns what's happened in the last couple of hours and what I should be aware of. At this time, I'm going to go over to Crowdtangle or whatever it might be to check up on these particular alerts or on these lists or on these searches, and to try and segment the time out that way. Because in my experience anyway, if doing it, yeah, if we're not if I'm not marking out my time, then it does become a lot. I can certainly confirm that.
Definitely, and just to kind of add on to that, yeah, this is a particularly challenging time in terms of keeping up to date with information. So I wrote a piece on this a few days ago for First Draft, just on maintaining your mental well-being, reporting on this topic as well as other topics it is relevant for. So yeah, having a separation between your work and life can be really useful. So after you've finished working, kind of trying to switch off, but while you're actually monitoring, to take regular breaks, take your lunch hour, those kind of things, which kind of sound obvious, but lots of journalists and researchers do either forget to do or we're just too busy. but also, yeah, just I think in terms of what you're monitoring, during the UK election, we did some monitoring at the end of last year, and it just really helps to really stick to what you're looking for and not to get lost in the wormhole that can be the internet. So that's kind of crucial to staying, yeah, mentally well on the job.
Yeah, just to build on that as well. I mean, one of the pieces of advice that's in that's in Lydia's piece that's really worked for me, that I really liked, is this idea of performing an action that kind of makes you mentally sign off at the end of the day. So for me, it's just writing down what I've actually done during the day and kind of summarizing that, and that kind of provides me with a kind of closing chapter. Right, I've done that. So now it's done, and now I can move on to something else that I've really personally enjoyed.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I wanted to emphasize that, Lydia's piece is like really great and like really worth a look for like journalists looking for self-care tips in these challenging times. But if there are any newsroom like editors, like managers, like on this call, I also want to emphasize it's really, really important for you to look out for your reports too. I don't know about you guys, but here at First Draft, like our New York and London offices are all like working from home now, which adds a layer of complexity to being able to monitor and like check in on each other as we're doing all this work and kind of getting like, overloaded by this information. But it actually becomes like even more important for us to check in on each other and to make sure that our staff and our freelancers, our reporters are getting like the mental health like breaks they need from like looking at all this like information like all the time, which can be like very overwhelming. So newsrooms truly like do have a responsibility when they're asking their employees to go and monitor and news gather and like verify and like report like, on all of this, to really look out for people's like well-being, look for signs of like vicarious trauma, which First Draft has some excellent like resources on, and the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma also has like great resources on this. We'll share like some of these resources with you afterwards as well in a follow-up email. So if you go to our portal, you will see like a list of upcoming webinars, and we'll be adding to them all the time. So take a look at that, and thank you very much for joining us today.